Have you ever stored a password or connection string inside your Azure application? What if I tell you Azure provides a way for your resources to access other services in Azure without any passwords at all? In this video, we'll understand everything regarding Azure Managed Identity, the problem, the existing identity types, and a step-by-step demo. So hi, I'm Arya. On this channel, I simplify Azure for beginners with practical demos. Let's start from the very basics. Why there was a requirement for Azure Managed Identity and what problem did it solve? In Azure, resources often need to talk to other resources. Like a virtual machine needs to access a storage account, or a web app reading secrets from Key Vault, or an application writing data to a database. So in these all cases, Azure service is accessing other services to get the information or to put or write the information. The scenario can be any, but the question is how does one resource authenticate to another, right? Now to begin with how the authentication was done earlier. So earlier traditionally we used storage keys, connection strings, secrets, and the issue the secrets were stored in a code. Because of that there was a risk of exposure and we had to manually rotate passwords. It was difficult to manage at scale when we had a lot of applications, a lot of passwords or client secrets to manage, and that is where Azure Identity solution comes in. Azure Managed Identity helped with passwordless managed identity. It was created and managed by Azure, fully automated. You didn't have to manage the credentials or rotate the passwords. It was automatically done by Azure. So managed identity offloaded a lot of hassle and management. So now to begin with managed identity, it is very important to understand what kind of identities we already have in Azure and where is Azure Managed Identity in this entire ecosystem. For that, we'll go to this slide. So in Azure and Entra ID, we mainly have four types of identities, and that is how all the users, applications, and access to them in the Azure infrastructure is managed, right? Identity type, the first is user identity. This represents a human user. Like when I logs into Azure portal and use my username and password to log into Azure. It could be admin, developers, contractors, it could be anyone, and it's a human user. Next we have is group. Basically that is a collection of users grouped together. Basically where we assign multiple members in the group and manage the RBAC access, like grouping the database admin users together and assigning them access on the Azure RBAC, right? Next we have the service principal. This is used when an application needs to access Azure resources. And when I say application, you can take an example of Azure DevOps. So Azure DevOps to push or deploy the changes to the Azure. In those scenarios, we'll use service principal. And the next we have is the managed identity. And managed identity is an identity automatically created and managed by Azure for a single resource, or it can be multiple resources as well. It allows the resources to authenticate to other Azure services without storing credentials. You do not have to manage any passwords or tokens. Everything is going to be managed by Azure. You just need to assign the appropriate RBAC role so that the one Azure resource has the permission to access other resource, like a virtual machine accessing storage account, right? Other thing to keep in mind, in user or group, we mainly have human identities, but when an application requires access, we use service principal or managed identity where the human involvement is not required. Now let's go to Azure portal. I'll show you this all identities in Entra IDs so that you can get an idea. So when we go to Entra ID, we have users, then we have groups, and for service principal we can create them from app registration, and other we have is identity, which we'll see with the specific resources where we create and assign. For that, let's head to the demo and how do we create identity, manage and assign permissions. So for that we'll do a simple test. We'll create a virtual machine and a storage account. In the storage account we'll put the simple text file and access that file from the virtual machine. So in this case we'll create virtual machine and storage account, then we'll enable identity, then we'll assign the permissions to the identity to access the data from the virtual machine, and then we'll log into the virtual machine, authenticate to the identity, and then access file from the storage account, right? For now, let's head over to the portal and create these two resources. I'll keep everything as default. Next, management. And in here, while creating the resource, we also have the option to enable the identity. But I'll show you after the resource has been created so that you can do it for the resources you already have in your Azure environment. I'll keep everything as default and next review and create. So meanwhile, it's getting created. Let's go to the storage account and create one. So my two resources are created. I'll go to all resources and check virtual machine and storage account. So you can see the virtual machine and the storage account is there, right? Keep in mind, so whenever you are accessing one resource from the other, you need to enable identity on that resource from where you are trying to access other resource. In my case, I'm going to access it from the virtual machine. So I'll go to the resource and then search for identity. And you can see under security, we have that option. And now we can see two options, that is system assigned identity and a user assigned identity. Both serves their own purpose. I'll show you the difference after this demo. For this case, I'll just enable for system assigned identity and then save. After that, identity will get created in Microsoft Entra ID. As you can see here also registering identity test with Microsoft Entra ID, and this is specifically attached to this particular resource. And you can see we have got object principal ID that has the one-to-one link with the Entra ID, and we can assign our back roles now to this specific identity as well. To verify this identity, we can go to Entra ID and then we can go to enterprise applications, and in enterprise application we'll change it all application, and then we can just directly copy this identity and then paste here to search, right? And you can see my identity is registered in Enter ID. That means we can assign permissions, roles directly so that it can access other resources. So this was how we can see identity in the Enter ID. Now let's go back and assign this identity permissions to access storage account. For that, we'll go to storage account and then open this, and then we'll go to IAM of the storage account, which is identity and access management, and then add role assignment. And now we'll choose the role or permission that we want the identity to have on this specific resource. Like in this case, I want it just to read. For that, I'll search for reader access, storage blob data reader, which will just allow the user to just read and not make any modifications from the virtual machine. So you can see here we have four parameters, which I just showed you earlier. We have four types of identities that can come from a user, group, service principal, or a managed identity. In this case, I'll choose managed identity and select members. In the managed identities, we have one identity which is allocated to virtual machine. If we select this, we can see the name which is identity test, which matches with the one which we just created. And then we'll select this one and then next. And now before assigning the permission, I'll access the virtual machine and see if currently I can access this storage account. For that, I'll go to virtual machine and copy the public IP to access it. Instead of accessing it from terminal or the cloud shell, I'll access it from serial console, which will be quick and fast. And now the user I gave was identity, password put. I am inside the machine to log into the Azure via identity. So this will utilize the identity which we created to log into this account. And you can see it doesn't have any access because we didn't assign any permissions at that point of time. Now let's go back to the storage account and assign this identity permission to access the storage account. And then we'll review and assign. Now let's give it a minute or two for the changes to reflect, and this command will log in using the VM's managed identity and no username and password, as you can see. Now I'll again try. Now it has the access, and now I'm successfully logged into my account and I can access whatever permissions this particular identity has been assigned to any resources. And now let's run the command to access from this virtual machine. First, let's create the container where we are going to store the data. For that, I'll go to data storage and then containers. And container is just a bucket where we are going to place our files. I'll give the name test and then create, and then upload any files from my local machine. I'll simply upload one image and then upload, and it's updated successfully. Now let's use the command to access this particular container. I'll use this command. Now let's see if it can access. Now, if we scroll down, we have an image here and the name of the image and some properties, and I can access from here. And you can notice we never use storage keys, we never stored secrets. So this was the demo how do we utilize the identity to access any other resource. And now let's check the final, what are the two types of identities we get. So we got a user assigned managed identity and a system assigned identity. We created a system assigned identity in this case, in which basically we assign the identity directly to the virtual machine. We enable identity on resource, then identity gets created in Azure, and identity is bound to the resource. Delete the virtual machine, identity will also get deleted automatically. So it gets created and deleted with resource, and this identity can only be assigned to one resource. Like in our case, only virtual machine can have this identity assigned, but we can have multiple permissions attached to multiple resources. Azure handles all the credentials management and automatically deleted when the resource is also deleted, right? And the user assigned managed identity, we create an independent resource and we can assign this to multiple resources like virtual machines, web app, or the function app. So it has the independent lifecycle. It doesn't depend on a single resource, reusable across multiple resources. And if no longer required, we can manually delete them. Now let's go to the Azure portal and check how do we create one. So we'll search for identity and click on create. And other thing we have to keep in mind that whatever identity we create via this way is the user assigned identity, and the identity which we create via the Azure resource way, like the way we created in the Azure Virtual Machine before, is a system assigned identity, right? We can give a name here, user assigned managed identity, UAMI, and then the location, and then the next, and review and create. So now after this identity is created, similarly you can assign the permission to various resources and this get registered in the enter ID as well. So this was the quick demo. How do we create the managed identity and use that to access other resources and the types of managed identity, right? So if this video has helped you in understanding managed identity, please like and subscribe and see you in the next one.